All right. Thank you. And we are now being live streamed just for the members of the committee, our staff, and the public. Welcome. So whoever's going to call the roll, please proceed.
Senator Driscoll.
Excused.
Senator Garou.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Excused.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Connolly.
Here.
Representative Gray.
Here.
Representative Greer.
Here.
Representative Jennings.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Excused.
Representative Olson.
Here.
Representative Summers.
Here.
Representative Washit.
Here.
Representative Wilson. Representative Yen.
Here.
Representative Wanitzer.
Here.
Co-Chairman Barlow.
Here.
Co-Chairman Dockstetter.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And Mr. President, I'm not trying to take over, but I know we want to be timely in this.
Yeah, please proceed.
So do you want to make any opening comments?
No, let's just go straight to work and please proceed with leading the meeting, Mr. Speaker. Go ahead.
All right. So thank you, members, and our welcome to the members of the public who may be observing this and or maybe other colleagues who are observing it. Director Obrecht, I think the course of action we had talked about was to just walk through the rules page or section by section, page by page, and take questions as they may come up from the members. Members, it's probably easiest if you would raise your yellow hand so that the director and I can see it on the participant bar. If you have questions as we're on a page or a particular item. And then we'll maybe have some general discussion at the very end. Chief clerks and staff, obviously, if you want to weigh in somewhere, if there's a question, please also feel free to participate. So anything else, Director, before you want to take off? I did ask Mr. Sarah before you maybe were on if we wanted to screen share it so we're all looking at the same thing, or if you want us to all put it up separately. So I'll leave that to you and Mr. Sarah, but I think I would like us to make sure we're all looking at the same version of everything. So however you'd like to proceed, Mr. Obrecht, please do so.
Mr. Speaker, that'd be great if Anthony would share his screen. Anthony, it is the version draft 2 that I just sent you in an email I sent the Rules Committee, and which we'll be posting to our website here shortly. We noticed a missing section in the rules that were posted that we didn't have from the May 2020 session that was fairly critical. So we've got those put in strike and underline form so we can see the addition in this version. There it is. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the Senate and House Rules Committees, these are the proposed rules for a special session occurring in October or November of 2021. They will amend the joint rules of the House and Senate by adding Joint Rule 24. Subsection A of the joint rule, the proposed joint rule, states just that during a special session in October or November of this year, bills on a list first proposed by the respective majority floor leaders and receiving a majority vote of the elected members of each house voting separately will be introduced as mirror bills in the House and the Senate. The list is amendable and debatable, and to be considered to be placed on that list, all bills needed to be posted today by 5 on our website, which we are currently working to get done. Those bills that received sponsor final approval by noon today. And I think last count, we have 19 bills that received approval. All of those have prime sponsor in both the House and the Senate. Once the bodies decide on that list, they will be, the bills on that mirror bill list will be assigned to standing committees by the president and speaker respectively. Any other bill that doesn't make that list pursuant to Rule 2A will be referred to the House or Senate Rules Committee. I need to, if anyone has a question on subsection A, maybe just speak up.
Matt, this is Representative Zwanitzer. I do have a question on it. When it comes to bill sponsorship, is there any limit the number of bills an individual legislator can introduce? If there are 18 bills, how many of them have the same prime sponsor? Any limits on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, only those limits that would be in effect for a general session in either the House or the Senate. And neither of those limits were reached to my knowledge. Representative Greer, I can see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So we've got 19 mirrored bills. So there's 19 bills in each house. Okay, so the question is then the majority 4 leaders put together the consent list. Is that correct?
Representative Greer, that's correct. The first, yep, the consent list that will be introduced.
Okay, so then, Mr. Ulbrich, so it's amendable and debatable, meaning a member can bring an amendment to add a bill to that consent list, and then it's debated.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Greer, that's exactly right. And they can also move to strike a bill from the list.
Okay, so Mr. Ulbrich, I just want to be clear. A consent list is a consent list. So when we say it's amendable and debatable, it just means the amendments are debatable, not the consent list, right?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Question, Matt. So does Rule 24, where is it? E2, sorry, the one where it's 5 minutes max for each amendment, does that apply to amendments to this motion?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, it does.
Mr. Chairman, different question if Representative Yin is done. Okay, and just to know, I don't see the yellow hand to put up with screen sharing, but my question is that if there are 19 bills, will all of those 19 bills be put up on the LSO website?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, yes, they will be. And know this, there's a possibility that additional bills could also be posted on the website that we received after the cutoff. We will give you a list of those bills for your consideration if if Joint Rule 24 is adopted in this form.
All right, continue on, Matt, I think.
Okay. Mr. Chairman,
I'm not seeing the hand too.
Representative Gray.
Okay, so if a bill comes in after the deadline, you're going to post it, but then it can't be on the consent list if this rule passes.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, that's exactly right. Unless if you were to adopt this rule as written, then you could put it on the consent list with another 2/3 vote to suspend this rule for that bill.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should be clear about the 5 days and in what the leadership and President Dockstader and the director and I, the 5 days in advance is to give all of us the opportunity to actually review the bills prior to coming into session. The public, most importantly. So not only not having a workload that went through the weekend and up to the last minute for staff, which is something we wanted to avoid as well, but also so that people could actually look and read and study the bills before they were taken up potentially by the body. So I think there's two practical reasons. One is workload, and two is timing and workload, and the two is just, read the bill before we start voting on them. So I hope that is understandable and why we suggested this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, subsection B just clarifies that of the two mirror bills that are introduced, only one of those mirror bills will become law. So it's just like with the budget bill, where we will decide whether it's a House or Senate bill once it passes both bodies. C deals with the process of in committee of the whole. If you remember, in the May 2020 special session, there were no amendments allowed in committee of the whole. And that is simply a time management function. With this special session, since these bills will all be heard in standing committee, it seemed to be appropriate to allow standing committee amendments to be heard in committee of the whole, but only standing committee amendments.
Thank you, Matt. And I just want to just interject here, and this we'll get to it a little later when we talk about all the rules that are suspended. But another thing that we're suspending in these rules that's relative to this issue is the re-referral to appropriations. So if we want to have a discussion about, we can have that discussion later, or we can have it now, because there was some discussion with some of us of doing a simultaneous referral both to a standing committee of principal policy jurisdiction, if you will, and to the appropriations at the same time. And then we might have two standing committee amendments to consider on committee of the whole. So I just throw that out there as it's not in these rules. In these rules, we're actually just eliminating the need for re-referral to appropriations. But there is potentially another way to have that addressed. Thank you, Director.
You bet.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to go back to the consent list really quick. Does the rule, I don't read this to preclude multiple attempts to pass a consent list. So say the consent list fails after it's amended or hasn't been amended, you could attempt it again, correct?
I guess I would put it like this. You may be able to attempt it again immediately upon the adoption of the list, but you would need to do it before the House or Senate gavel out on that first day to go into standing committee. Because even if you get it approved, your bills will be timed out, because the second day, the whole second day will be devoted towards consideration of the bill wholly within the first house. So if it's not heard in a standing committee that first day, it doesn't really have a chance to get through on this schedule.
Please proceed.
Okay. Subsection D, as you can see here, because it's in red and underlined, is the section that I forgot, the subsection. This allows for all three readings of a mirror bill in the House of Origin on the same day. And it also provides, importantly, for at least 90 minutes at the conclusion of each reading. It also is the basis that we will use for our amendment process. That we'll ask that amendments for second reading be submitted to LSO before the end of committee of the whole and finalized 15 minutes before the announced start time for second reading, and the same for third reading, that they be submitted to LSO before the end of third reading and finalized and approved 15 minutes before third reading is announced to start. Okay, I think we can go on to subsection E. And these are the speaking limits. No members.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Summers.
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Matt, the policy, I assume that the policy on amendments will be emailed out to the body so they have a clear understanding of that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, that's a great point. We will email that out, and I think something, if we're talking about amendments right now, we should probably mention is how we will handle standing committee amendments. First, with the mirror bill process, a substitute bill cannot come out of a standing committee. It's just does not comport to the mirror bill process. We would also ask standing committees, while the amendments can certainly have substantive policy changes, we would ask that the committees refrain from entire rewrites in the committee of the bill. Something that's not at all unheard of during the session, but it's hard to capture within the mirror process. And know this, just like a budget bill, mirror amendments that pass both houses cannot be touched or disregarded within the joint conference committee. So if you can get a mirror amendment passed on a bill, it immediately will become part of the bill through the joint conference committee process. So, and then we'd also ask that something committees do sometimes when we've got more time is conceptual amendments, where they don't have exact language that they want, and they ask LSO to draft a conceptual amendment and then maybe clean it up on second or third reading the next day. We wouldn't have time to be able to do that in this special session.
Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Director Albrecht, I want to go back to that new language on committee of the whole. And I think what you said is that an individual needs to have an amendment to LSO 15 minutes before the end of the completion of committee of the whole. That confuses me. How do we know when the end of the committee of the whole will be to back it up by 15 minutes? Or did I hear that or read that wrong?
Representative Connolly, I think what I said was you need to first get to LSO that you want an amendment before the end of committee of the whole. Just let us know, and we will be available via email or in the bullpen or through a phone call. And then you just need to approve the amendment, final approval 15 minutes before the start of whatever reading it is, either second or third reading.
Okay.
Representative Conley.
Got it.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
Okay. I think we just have the exceptions in subsection E to the well, no member speak more than twice on any question or amendment, and no member shall occupy the floor for more than 5 minutes each time the member speaks, and no extensions. And that doesn't apply to explanation of the mirror bill during committee of the whole in the first house, or explanation of amendments to a mirror bill on committee of the whole. And it doesn't also apply to explanation of the joint conference committee report.
So for the members of the House that are not used to this rule, is this not the same rule that the Senate uses?
It is, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Speaker, subsection F really deals with what happens when a bill passes the House, and this is a mirror bill passes each House, and this is the same as how we handle the budget bill. So when a mirror bill passes the House of Origin, it's delivered directly to the second House without engrossing, but we give a list of adopted amendments that's then explained in the second House or in the opposite House on that mirror bill. And it can't be recalled after that time.
Representative Wilson, Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I don't fully understand this part. So unless the assignment to committee goes to a joint committee, excuse me. So let's suppose a bill goes to House Labor, we adopt some amendment, goes through the House. When it goes down to the Senate and it goes directly to third reading, how will the Senate Labor Committee know? I mean, they can read it like anybody can read it, but how will they have an explanation to give, seeing as it didn't go through their committee, but unless it were some sort of a mirror amendment? But if it's not a mirror amendment, I don't understand how they will know, how they will have an explanation.
Yep. Representative Conley, I think that's a pretty good question. And it's just like the budget bill in that the opposite appropriations committees don't actually get the physical bill itself for an explanation from a sponsor in the House or the Senate, from the opposite House, of what the amendments did. LSO staff provides that explanation. And then those members then explain those amendments on the floor to the House or the Senate. And in this case, what I assume it'll be, and this is what it was in May of 2020, is it'll be members of the appointed Joint Conference Committee who would explain the opposite House's amendments.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
So maybe I'm reading this in an excessively chronological way. So it says, during the third reading debate in the second House, each amendment adopted by the House of Origin shall be explained. Then going down to G, so they've explained the amendments. There's no third reading amendment. Okay, so it'll go then direct. So is the conference committee going to be appointed like at the origin of the bill, or will it just be the chairman of the standing committee? I guess I'm just sorry. Somehow it doesn't seem that obvious to me.
So I'll just pitch in just a little bit here, Director Obrecht, because all of these bills have individual sponsors and prime sponsors on both sides. It would seem that it would be a sponsor or a committee member that is familiar with the bill that may do that, help with that explanation. I don't know if Director, if that helps any, but these are all individual bills, co-sponsored, prime sponsored and co-sponsored on opposite sides. So it would seem to me that if if a bill came from the Senate and I was the House chief sponsor on it, it would be partly my obligation to get up and explain what the opposite house did as they worked the bill. Whether I agreed with it or not, I mean, that we're just giving an explanation of what the form of the bill is right now. And at least in my perspective, and looking back at the 2020 special session, often there was some understanding of who the conferees were going to be, and so they would be preparing for that as well on the floor, and then subsequently to go to conference committee. Director Obrecht, is that helpful at all, or Representative Wilson?
We'll make do.
Please proceed, Director.
Oh, okay, I think Representative Wilson already got us going here on subsection G. So notwithstanding the Senate and House Rule 6-1, when a mirror bill is introduced in the second house, it's placed directly on third reading. And then during that third reading debate in the second house, that's when the explanation happens. This rule says the explanation will happen by a member of the standing committee to which the bill was referred. That could be open to a sponsor, but it seemed like a good placeholder to put in here. That even if the House Minerals Committee didn't know what the amendments were in the Senate, we'd explain it to them so they'd be able to walk through it.
Let's go with Representative Greer, and then Wilson, I see your hand up too. So Representative Greer.
Mr. Speaker, so, and I kind of had a question mark by this. I too was a little fuzzy, but in essence, it's a matter of, are we concurring with the Senate amendments? Is that what the vote ends up being? If we take this back to a traditional approach, am I seeing that right? So for example, and this won't happen, but if there were like 2 Senate amendments that were different, and we brought those into the House and explained them, and then our vote would be in essence to concur with those amendments, or would be an aye vote. But if we want to go to conference committee, no. Am I seeing that correctly?
Director, maybe speak to the vote issue first.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that probably, just the only good analogy I can give here is exactly how we handled the budget bill. There is no, the vote is, or the explanation is what the amendments in the first house were, or in the opposite house. And then, Mr. Chairman, we don't take a vote. It's just immediately assigned to a joint conference committee.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I obviously the summer sucked my brain out, and I've forgotten how we do it on budgets. But so if the bill starts in the House, our version of the mirror bill, and then we get, well, let's just take the Senate one. The Senate one comes over to the House. They have some amendments that we don't like. If we're not going to take a vote on them, and I've forgotten how we do the budget there, but if the Senate had some good ideas, if the House liked it or didn't like it, but if there's no vote to be taken, then how does the conference committee know what the will of the chamber is on an amendment that may not have occurred to the first body?
Director, would you maybe use the identical amendment, this explanation sheet that we use in the budget might be appropriate in this case to help with this discussion.
Yep.
Thank you.
You bet. So I think that's absolutely right, is that you have an explanation sheet prepared by LSO on what's the identical amendments to those passed and what the other amendments do. And then members get up and will ask questions about the amendments in the opposite house. And that's how members of the standing committee or the joint conference committee gauge the house's feeling about the opposite house amendments.
Remembering that the primary rule is you try to maintain your house's position within the bounds of the unidentical components. I think that's at least how we approach the budget.
And
Representative Gray.
You've got a process in Joint Rule 14 that talks about straw poll. It's never been used, frankly, in the 15 years I've been here. So we didn't think it was necessary to put in these rules.
Thank you. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess, as we talk about this more, it just seems like it's a little bit different from the budget. There's almost the chances of having the same draft is highly unlikely on the budget. But what would happen if you just have mere amendments? I mean, I guess it's just a short conference committee, but that's one question I have. Two is like Representative Wilson was saying, would it be too difficult to draft in a way where the House would be able to have a consent vote on the Senate amendments and you'd have to sequence it, and the Senate could do it on the House, and if either one passed, then the process ends because the other House has consented to what the other House has done. and you'd have to sequence it, but I think it could, and it is a little, but I think it makes more sense on this and this special session, the way we're doing it, than on the budget. I do understand it's a unique way of doing it, but those are my two questions.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly think you could have an amendment to these to vote for concurrence. But it would be, I still think you could do it. It would be a little awkward because the bills are in possession of both houses at the same time. But even if one house appointed a conference committee, if they got a message from the opposite house that house was rescinding from its position and concurring to all Senate amendments, it's just really not how the mirror bill process works, though. And here's why. You spend so few time with this bill, and you don't know exactly why one house adopted the positions it did. I'm not saying you can't do it, but there's a reason why you don't. That just that time to come together on that joint conference committee to figure out why each house took the positions they did, even if ultimately one house does completely agree with the amendments adopted in the other house.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have suggested language right at the moment because I highlighted this part, but I guess it kind of concerns me that the second body is really not having a chance to consider the value of amendments. They may not have been a mere amendment, but an amendment from the other body and vote on it. The thing is that with the budget, the Joint Appropriations Committee has been meeting for a month or 2 months, and has worked through things a lot, and we've had significant discussion. But, you know, on this, the amendments that might be offered will be the process of like 4 hours of thought. And I mean, I feel like there's a real difference here where we're trying to pass laws that will impact 500,000 people potentially, and business, and lots of businesses. And we're really not getting the full involvement of both chambers to consider the other bodies, what might have been good ideas. I mean, both houses may just not come up with the great bright idea by, you know, 5 o'clock on Tuesday. I don't know. I just, where it says no third reading vote will be taken on a mirror bill, it just seems to me that after the discussion, maybe even not having, because going back up, were we going to allow people to speak on that? Evidently not, or question it. We could at least let people vote. I don't know. I feel like we're really missing some input on this part.
So the only limitation for speaking on the unlimited speaking is the explanation of the first house's actions. There are limits of 2 and 5 minutes for members to speak. So in the House, that would be 59 people times 10 minutes. Seems like a lot of input potentially.
So, Mr. Speaker, just to follow up, so what I hear, maybe the thought then is that whoever the probable conference committee people will be, or who think they might be on the conference committee, should basically give themselves a little tally sheet and just write down the marks of the people who actually bother to get up and talk, which maybe if people were going to be able to vote, they wouldn't feel the need to talk.
Well, I mean, let's keep moving. But I think if there is a solution that you have until next Tuesday, when we convene, to bring an amendment to put before the body that may address your interests in this. So, unless there's more questions on the second house, third reading, and then going on, please proceed, Director.
Yep, we're on subsection J now, which just deals with joint conference committee procedures on these mirror bills. Both mirror bills refer to a single joint conference committee. The conference committee, I'll have 3 people appointed from each side. A majority of each conference committee shall be appointed from the prevailing side of the vote for third reading and final passage of the bill originating in that house. Chairmanship of the conference committee starts with the Senate, and then it alternates between the House and Senate after the first day. Down to paragraph 4. First conference committee is not a free committee. What that means is, as you all know, is that the committee has to confine itself to the structures of the limits of both the bills as they pass out of the House and the Senate. They can't go beyond that. If they can't agree, any second or subsequent appointed committee would then be a free committee that could come up with ideas and amendments outside of the 2 bills, outside of the 2 positions in the houses. Paragraph 5 at the bottom of page 3 deals with the disposal of adopted Senate and House amendments, and that only 1 report will go back on both bills, and that the reports will be simultaneously considered in both houses. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Subsection K just deals with motion for reconsideration on a mirror bill. It's in order only on the same day that the original vote was taken and only if the bill is still in the possession of that house. And it will be taken no later than the last item of business on the day of the original vote. So that'll mean late at night on the 27th, you can have a chance to reconsider a vote on a mirror bill. And if a vote to reconsider has passed or failed on a motion under the subsection, it shall not be in order to move to rescind the vote on that motion. Mr. Chairman, subsection N deals with the rules that will not apply to mirror bills under these rules. And I'll just go through the list quickly here. Senate House Rule 4-8 is referrals of bills requiring appropriations. The speaker touched on that earlier. There won't be re-referrals of bills requiring an appropriation to the respective appropriations committees. Senate Rule 5-2B and House Rule 5.2 requires notice of standing committee meetings by 3 p.m. of the preceding day. Senate Rule 6-5A and 6-6B is actually stricken from these new rules. And the reason is that was no roll call on committee of the whole. During the May 2020 session, no action was taken on committee of the whole except for an explanation of the bill. With a opening that up to standing committee amendments and a standing committee having heard the bill, there is the potential that those bills could fail on committee of the whole, and a roll call vote would then need to be taken if that failed committee of the whole. So we've removed in this draft 2 reference to 6-5 in A in the Senate and 6-6B in the House. Okay. Senate Rule 6-5C, House Rule 6-6A is no limit on speeches. Obviously, we've got limits now in these rules. The respective Rule 7-1 is bills have to be read on 3 separate days. Senate Rule 7-3, House Rule 7-3, bills allowed to be laid back for an additional day on second or third reading. Can't have that 3-day session. Senate and House Rule 7-4 respectively. Second reading required at least 1 day after committee of the whole. Senate Rule 7-8, House Rule 7-9, third reading required at least 1 day after second reading. And House Rule 7-7, the acceleration of third reading didn't seem to be necessary since they will all be on the same day.
Chairman Greer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Matt, could I get a copy of that breakdown? I always have this sinking feeling that I garner extra assignments from the speaker, so I'd like to have that handy. And then could you just go over one more time? I'm a slow thinker regarding the committee of the whole vote for me.
You bet. Mr. Speaker and Representative Greer, we can certainly get you a copy, this annotated copy. Legislative Counsel Revelate was nice enough to make me an annotated copy, so I can pass that on to you. Okay, so for Committee of the Whole, during the May session, May 2020 session, the special rules you adopted for that session provided for no amendments at all during Committee of the Whole. It was simply a bill explanation. So as such, it didn't seem to be appropriate to the members of the 65th to allow a bill to die on Committee of the Whole. And so then therefore there was no need for a roll call vote. A roll call vote's only necessary on Committee of the Whole when that bill fails to advance through Committee of the Whole. So now, since a bill since we're amending a bill and it will be debated, it could fail the Committee of the Whole vote. and therefore a roll call vote could be necessary if that happens.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, subsection N deals with those members who may attend a special session remotely. First, it requires the prior approval of the respecting presiding officers. And if they get that approval, and if this rule is adopted in this form, they will be considered present in person and within the bar of the respective House or Senate, shall be permitted to vote, and shall be counted for purposes of determining whether a quorum is present. And this is the ratification clause. All actions heretofore undertaken and performed by the Senate and House for members to attend a special session remotely and to be considered present are hereby ratified and approved. And then the last, or the next sentence just allows the presiding officers to determine what will be the appropriate means for voting for those who do appear remotely. And this is just if we allow remote participation, if we have a requirement to print, distribute, deliver, or sign under any rule, it can be satisfied by electronic means.
Thank you. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity on this, Matt, I'm believing that there was at some point discussion on this. I can't remember if we actually turned it into a rule or not, but there was discussion, at least in the House, about virtual participation and actually having to be visible and on camera, and allowing that as part of the process. And I thought that was actually done during our virtual session when we did our special session virtually, that you weren't allowed to just have a blank screen and then vote aye or whatever the case may be. It was required for that. Was there any discussion brought forward for that? And if so, can we get maybe a little bit of explanation as to why it was not brought back in this time around?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, Representative Brown, it was not in Joint Rule 23 for the session, but if memory serves, Management Council policy for interim committee meetings does speak to the need for a camera to be on and in person to be considered as present and a member of the quorum.
That's exactly what it was. Thank you.
And Tamara might have, that was a crazy meeting, Mr. Chairman, frankly, and it was hard for me to remember exactly what we came up with out of that meeting, but we can find that exact language for you if it in fact exists, Representative Brown.
So just for the members, and I've been approached by several folks who are either not going to attend or have other obligations and are looking for the opportunity to participate remotely. And I'll just speak from where I'm at. I'm not going to speak for the president, and I'm certainly understand that if this rule is adopted, I would have some discretion. And if that presiding officer language is taken out, I would have no discretion. My approach is going to be, if you have a public health instance where you need to be, i.e. quarantined, or you're recovering from a surgery or something, that is something that I would consider, if this rule were adopted, as a reasonable means to promote or participate remotely. For the convenience of other things and work, etc., I personally am going to be less receptive. So I think that you should carefully consider that prior approval of the respective presiding officer, because I will probably be fairly limited in what I would consider a reasonable need. And I'm not suggesting the president needs to make any statement about it, but because we haven't spoken about it, but that's how I'm thinking about it. So as these rules are considered next week, think about, how the respective officers may take it. And if you want broader ability for people to participate for personal convenience or whatever, you probably want to take my ability to make a judgment out of that sentence or out of that paragraph. Thank you. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What are your plans on a veto override? Do you have any, does that extend to a veto override?
So yeah, that would be a little different. And Matt, maybe we walk through that calendar. I would consider that differently. I'm talking about the actual session days, the 3 days that we're in Cheyenne doing that work. And the veto override would be up to 3 days later. We would not be able to adjourn. We would just be, anyway, Matt, if you want to walk through that, we've talked about that timeline.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, so if the legislature wanted to consider the potential for receiving a veto message from Governor Gordon at this special session, what process would need to be followed at least is bills will be delivered to the governor. I gotta pull up my calendar, but on the 28th, which is a Thursday, the governor would then have, if we do not adjourn but recess to a date, he's got under the Constitution 3 days excluding Sunday to return the veto message. If we don't prevent its return if the legislature doesn't prevent its return by its adjournment. So, Mr. Chairman, his clock would start midnight on the 29th. 29th would be day 1. 30th would be day 2. Sunday, the 31st would not count. Monday, November 3rd by 11:59 p.m. is when the governor, if the House is gavelled back in that day, would have to return the bill to us. And so potentially, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, depending on when those veto messages would get back to us, the bodies could either vote to override vetoes on the 1st or potentially need to come back in on the 2nd to do that.
Thank you, Matt. So to Representative Gray's question, certainly if we do not adjourn on that day and the discretion is left to the presiding officers about veto, ability to participate remotely for the veto override and discussion, that would be something that I personally, as a presiding officer, would consider appropriate use of the veto of the remote option. Thank you.
So,
are we through the entire rule then, Matt?
Yep. And Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, for a possibility for a veto override, you would have to announce on October 28th your intention to return to meet on November 1st to give the governor the constitutional notice necessary for him to return that. If not, he's got 15 days in which to sign it and send to or not sign it and send to the Secretary of State.
Okay, thank you. Representative Gray, your hand's still up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple questions on the veto override procedure. So if we announce our intention to return and then there is no need for us to return, do we need to come back that final day, or can the presider just say it's expired? I mean, the Constitution says we have 20 days, right? But obviously we don't want to stay in, but yeah.
Director Oberg.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you would need to come back and officially adjourn the special session, even if no veto, even if the governor did not veto any bills. We need to do so to not run out the time on the 20 days on the special session.
Matt, to be clear, within the rules, a smaller than a majority can adjourn from day to day, but probably not adjourn the session. Is that correct? So we just needed a majority. And then if we go with this rule, it could be done remotely to adjourn on that first or second. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I see Representative Brown, and then we'll go back to Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Matt, kind of an interesting and odd question here, but since this spans the weekend, I know during a regular legislative session, we end up having to pay all the legislators I believe it's just Saturday, and I can't remember. Is that going to continue to be the case that we will pay legislators Saturday? And I can't remember if we paid them Sunday or not. And then will we be paying mileage to drive back and then back again as well? I mean, we already know that the contemplated costs are X, that 25 to 30,000, but that was for a 3-day session. Now that we're dragging this out over extra amount of days and potentially dragging this into a 4th and 5th day of session, it seems like the costs have gone up just that much more. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, that's right. Title 28 requires that when you are in session, you are paid for every day you're in session during that session, from the day you gavel until the day you gavel out. And Mr. Chairman, I think we probably would authorize per diem and mileage for a trip home that weekend too.
Representative Gray.
Director Obrecht, got a couple of questions more conceptually, because I think we're done, unless, O's kind of sound like we're done. In the second day, I think it's written here pretty clearly, but I just want to make sure all our bases are covered. One, if we go past midnight, and two, if the presider decides we need to go into the third day on maybe 1 or 2 bills. I don't know what LSO's position is on whether they can be engrossed and turned around, how long that would take, but that's actually my next question. But we're okay. 1, we go over midnight on that second day. 2, there is discretion to move over to the subsequent day if the presider decides to do that in the body.
Director.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so if we go over midnight, that's what happened in May of 2020 on the first day, when, I think we were in till over 2 or over 1 in the morning. Not a problem. We've already planned on using that legislative day anyways. And yet the rules also contemplate that the bills may actually not be completely disposed of in the House of Origin on the first day either, and then it might require 2 days to do so.
President Gray, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Speaker. If we do go into the third day, just so we understand the timing, what are the consequences in terms of engrossing the bill? Just so we know timing wise, obviously to get the message, we want to try to do that by that third day. So it'd have till 11:59 on the third day. How much, if we did go into the third day for some third reading of bills, what's the delay that would be until we could go into conference or come back to explain and then go into conference committee on those bills?
Director Obrecht.
Representative Gray, tough question to answer because it just depends on how many amendments where it would be adopted in both houses on those bills. If there were few to do the amendment report, what we'll do is the bills won't be engrossed like a normal bill is when it starts in one house is amended is engrossed with those amendments and passes over. So but what we'll do is an internal, what we call enrolling, where we'll be able to lay out for those members who need to explain the bill, how the amendments in the opposite house fit in that draft. And then at the end, when the JCC is adopted, we need to enroll the bill for the signatures of the presiding officers and have those sent down. Essentially, you know, if I would say that if you need to take bills in the House of Origin into the third day, it's likely we'll stay for a fourth day.
Thank you. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess, you know, in my role as majority floor leader, I really don't want to see a bill start after 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And so I'm going to likely work with my counterpart in the Senate to decide at what time we would start a last bill. That doesn't mean that's when we'll quit. For sure, could quit before that, but I don't want to start a bill later than 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night.
All right, any further general questions or questions on the specific rules? President Dockstetter, sorry.
I would hope that we have that kind of coordination so we keep the flow going between the floor leaders. So we'll keep the process going.
We'll be there that way.
And I'll just make a comment on that as well, to the president's point is, you know, the first day by rule, we're obligated to start at 10 in the morning. The second day, Chief Clerk and I have already talked about this. We're not going to be unreasonable about how early we start, but we're going to certainly start earlier, go to committee of the whole and trot right through things. Of course, depending on the number of bills that come out of committee, that'll determine our workload, the workload of the body as well. We can't be too early because we've got to let staff get the amendments ready for us to bring to the floor for consideration on committee of the whole, but it'll certainly not be 10 o'clock in the morning. At least it's not my intention in the first house. And then on the third day, the same thing. As soon as we'll try to time with staff how late we go on the second day. Hopefully we are finished on the second day. We'll determine how early we can convene on the third day for the reports, i.e. the reports from the opposite house and going to conference committee, so that hopefully we can keep things moving along efficiently. So 10 o'clock on the first day, but at least in the House, I would anticipate earlier days, the next two, I would say 8:30 or 9, probably at the latest. Chief Clerk's not nodding her head, but there you go. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before we adjourn, if sounds like we're getting close to the end, I just wanted to say, back to my earlier concern about not having any vote in the second chamber. I just want to say I'm kind of working on some amendment type language here as far as, and I'm just going to tell people a really brief, because what I would like, obviously if we want to have an amendment to the rules, we need to have it on both sides. So what I want to do is give about a 4-sentence explanation of what I'm thinking. And if there are people who are interested in that from House or Senate, please just send me an email separately for me to work on. But what it seems like I would need to do is to, on the first page, amend such that members may only speak twice on committee of the whole or second reading, that they could only speak once on third reading, and then cut it down from 5 minutes to 2 for third reading, just to get to the speaker's point about, we not going on forever and ever. My point where I stopped right now, because I haven't quite figured out how to deal with it, is, if we just get a sheet of all the changes from the first chamber, then you end up with now is it divisible and how do I deal with that, which could be a significant stumbling block. So that's where I am. If people are interested in something along those lines, please just send me an email offline. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion or questions for the director? Questions for the director on the rules as presented? Further clarifications? Chairman Zwanitzer, Representative Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can we have a quick talk about the committee process and how that's going to work? So I just want to make sure my understanding is clear. The House and the Senate are going to vote on the consent list bills. If they get a majority, they're going to be sent to a committee at who's choosing, I guess would be my first question. Will they be going to the same committee, and will the Speaker and the Senate President agree upon that to begin with on the interim committee, if they're going to an interim committee, a joint committee, or if they're going to separate committees in the House and the Senate? And then I guess my next question is there anything stopping, let's say the committee in question doesn't have the votes to pass that bill, from it being recalled directly to the floor, regardless of what the committee says on Tuesday? Would be my two questions.
So I think I'll take a stab at what I can. Director, President certainly weigh in. So the intention is they will go to the respective House standing committees. They will not be joint committees. Each bill will go to a standing committee that will be at the discretion, as it already is now, with the presiding officer. May not be the same committee on both sides. I don't know that. And one of the reasons I say that is because the House has a little more latitude because of committee memberships to spread them out a little bit. The Senate may not, because they have a lot more or fewer members on the same number of committees. So there's maybe more duplication. So that's at least the way I'm approaching it, or I'm understanding it is if we have 3 or 4 or 5 bills, like bills, will get the same, maybe 2 to one committee, 1 to another committee, 2 to the third committee, and et cetera. Hopefully with little overlap. And then that Tuesday afternoon, the afternoon of the 26th, hopefully we're wrapped up with rules, introduction, mirror introduction list, et cetera. And then we're referred by noon, noting that all of these bills will have to pre-notice them the day before to say, okay, if referred or if introduced and referred, this bill will be heard, and we're still working on that process, but there is a means to do that. So then the afternoon, we've kind of laid out, or there's kind of a schedule of some of the committees that start at 1 o'clock, some of them start at maybe 3 o'clock or 3:30, and 2 committees, and we have the means, depending on the number of people that are remote participating, both in the public, i.e. we're at least the anticipation is using webinar, so people could testify remotely, and I guess committee members, if that rule is passed, could participate remotely. And so we're trying to set it up so there's 3 to 4 hours for each committee to consider bills, hopefully be done by 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and then get them to our staff so they can work them and have them ready for us the next day for committee of the whole. Matt, am I missing anything in that description?
No, Mr. Speaker, I think you got it.
So any follow-up, Chairman Zwanitzer, Chairman Greer? Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman Zwanitzer, go ahead, follow up.
Well, I just wanted to check. So if one house passes the bill out of the committee for the mirror bill and the other house does not, is there any, what's the possibility that the full house in either side would just pull that bill directly to the floor because otherwise the bill's dead? It seems unfair that either way you go, if one side kills it in committee, it could be brought to the floor, and it's not brought to the floor if the other side kills it in committee. So what are the parameters around that?
Dr. Obrecht.
Mr. Chairman, Representatives Zwanitzer, there are no provisions for that. And it happened, right, during the May 2020 session. A bill was included in the mirror bill list in the Senate, but not in the House. That bill went through the Senate process and was reported out to the House, but it would have needed then to be introduced and referred to a committee in the House and followed the normal process. So it was simply not taken up in the House and wasn't advanced.
I think, Director, to the chairman's point, though, if a bill failed in a committee on day one, it could be recalled prior to committee of the whole on day two and referred directly to committee of the whole. That would be allowed under current rule. That is not amended out of our current 66th rules. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, it's accurate to the extent that it could be referred to another committee. Whether that committee is committee of the whole and whether that won't take a 2/3 vote to do it is another question.
Thank you. Chairman Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we should know if that's a 2/3 vote, Matt, just so we are aware of that, if that were to occur. I wanted so the webinar feature. This is maybe for LSO. So I envision having a lot of public input on these bills, and more of it being just comments, then less technical. So the question is on the webinar, because the first way to do that is obviously you got to limit time so someone doesn't go on. And then the first way to do it is take 1 for, 1 against. With the webinar feature, can we identify who is in favor of a bill and who isn't? And so what I would envision is go through a bill, let legislators speak, agencies if it's appropriate, take a break, have people sign up for or against, and then alternate. Is that going to be workable as a way to manage a committee with the webinar feature?
Director Obrecht.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Greer, I believe it is. I believe that you can create that field on the submittal form, just asking whether on the bill that you want to testify on, whether you're for or against that bill. And we can get IT to put that in that submittal form.
Any other questions? So just on that, while we certainly, it's been our practice to allow this remote participation. Committees are allowing it now through the interim. That's the reason, I guess, staff had said, well, we're going to continue with standard practice. Certainly, if there's folks that feel strongly that we need to be, if we're going to do everything in person, everybody needs to be in person, we can have that discussion. But for the time being, we're just basically following our current interim practice, which is allowing members and the public to participate in a remote type setting through the webinar feature. So our staff is not going out on a limb here. They're actually just conforming to what I think has been our practice this legislature so far. And was during the 66th general session as well. Matt, is that accurate?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's accurate. In fact, these rules are tight, more restrictive on remote participation than either the rules of the general session or the rules of the interim committee, in that they require presiding officer approval.
And Mr. Chairman, I did find some research. This is Tamara Redley.
Yes, please, Tamara.
As to that subsection N regarding remote participation, that did make it into Joint Rule 23-1, which is only applicable to the general session. And it did specifically provide that members need to be visible within a live video stream while on the meeting platform to be considered present. It also had that same language repeated related to the committee meetings. And so that was left out of this, not intentionally. This was just used from the 2020 special session. That provision wasn't in there, but then it got added into the joint rules of that House and the Senate.
Thank you. Good memory, Representative Brown. Thank you, Ms. Reveille. Any other questions or comments? Representative Brown.
Mr. Speaker, so with it not being in there, I guess my first question is, if we want that, I guess we need to bring that forward as a preparation for an amendment to these rules to be brought forward on the first day of session. Or is that something that this committee could bring forward as an amendment as a committee here to bring forward as a full amendment towards the rules to where we don't have to go through the full process, since these are just general rules anyways, these are draft rules.
So Matt, you want to speak to a little bit how we did the meeting notice on this, and maybe give us your thoughts on how we proceed with suggestions such as this, or knowing we have maybe another suggestion that'll come later next week from Representative Wilson. Director?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, Representative Brown. So this was noticed as an informal meeting where no official action would be taken. But if everyone likes an idea for an amendment to these proposed rules, and what I would suggest is LSO drafts one and just puts everyone's name on it, and to be debated on the floor of the House and Senate. Not from the Joint Rules Committee, but from the members of those committees individually.
So bottom line is, we're going to take no formal action. If we want to, do a quick straw poll on the video, live video stream issue, we could, everybody's interested in having that language added into these potential rules. If you gave a thumbs up, they would have it drafted for us and ready, or we can talk about it between now and Tuesday. We have until Tuesday. So any other further discussion or questions? Further discussion or questions? I would like to go to the chief clerks, just as a courtesy to the chief clerks. Do you have, and I didn't give you a heads up or warning, anything that the Rules Committee should be aware of as you're preparing for the special session? Clerk Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe so. I think they seem fairly familiar, having gone through the May 2020 special session. So I'm comfortable with where we're at, I think, on the set of proposed rules.
Okay, thank you, Chief Wendy.
I have to say the same thing. I think we're good to go.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any of the rest of the staff, Ms. Reveille, Mr. Shaw, Sarah, anybody else have anything they want to give us a heads up about? Seeing nobody flashing their hands up. President Dockstader.
No, thank you. Let's wrap it up here and get ready for next week.
All right, Director, anything before we depart?
No, nothing more from me, Mr. Speaker.
All right. So I would like to express the President and I's sincere appreciation of all the work that staff doing it, and staff has been doing in preparation for this, not just drafting bills for people, but all the other things, both our session staff, which is right now just the two chief clerks, but next week they'll be joined by some other folks, and our LSO professional staff. Thanks to all of you. We certainly appreciate the work you've been doing. I think there'll be some more discussions and meetings over the next few days as we continue to prepare. And tomorrow, just for all the members of the body, we'll be swearing in our new member of the House of Representatives, representative-elect or appointee-elect, or I don't know exactly what the terminology is, from Niobrara County. So at 11 o'clock for anybody that wants to be there that might be in Cheyenne. So with that, seeing no further business, the Rules Committee, the informal discussion of the Rules Committee is now adjourned.